starting with the agenda on public business, the evacuation procedure as is written, is the one exit out of the room, all the way down to opposite the Yorkshire Street, outside of the Yorkshire Bank. So apologies for the meeting, please. I have Councillors Duffer and Councillor Doughty. Are there any further apologies?
Councillor Andy Sargent sent his apologies.
Right. We have the minutes of the previous meeting on page 5. Are there any points that anyone confirming there a true and correct record in any points anyone might want to make? First of all, their true and correct record. I'm happy with that, thank you. And no points arising from the minutes. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Within the documentation you do have lists of the members' declarations of interest, and the words are all there for you to see. Public consultation. I have item 6, item 7, item 8 and 8 and 9. Item 9 where members, the councillor and members of the public have asked to speak. I will take them in order as we go through each of the items on the agenda. So moving then to item 6, which you will see is on page 9. This yours,
yes, Chair. Yes. Yes, Chair. This is the sort of an annual report that we bring every year to this committee. It is considered to be a good governance for members to review the operation of the Council's arrangements for declarations of gifts and hospitality and members' declarations of interests to ensure that things are being operated appropriately and in accordance with the legislation. The purpose of today is purely for members to scrutinise that and raise any questions that they may have. And if they have any concerns, then then obviously we will take those on board and take them away for further investigation. So it's there, as you can see, Chair, for consideration and any comments that would be.
On this particular item we have one speaker, Mrs Michelle Concord.
Thank you. I didn't want to really say an awful lot, but I just wondered, when I was looking through, I only just sort of randomly clicked on a few to see, because I haven't really looked at that before. But not everyone's declarations of interest were obtainable. Some came up, well, one came up on the website, clicked on it, and it's unobtainable. But generally, I was just concerned that councillors aren't being asked every year to actually update their interests and things, because it's very easy for things to sort of happen, things that you don't even actually think about as being relevant, and therefore I don't think everyone's is up to date, and I know at least one councillor whose address is not where they're currently living, even though they've signed it.
Well, basically, I mean, it is entirely up to members to make themselves aware of the review of the register of members' interest. So I would ask Mr Richardson if he would send a little reminder out to members to ensure that they keep their register of interest up to date. Can we do that for you?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, as a member of the public, if I'm like, I've been aware of this issue on a particular councillor, and I have no idea, there's nothing on the website and things to know who you should contact, who's responsible for actually maintaining this. I mean, I didn't know whether it was Democratic Services. I had no idea who to contact. It needs to be a bit clearer on the website.
As this is public speaking, Chair, I can't really answer questions, but I can deal with it
You're the one that I should be coming to.
We will have a look at it. Is there any member who wants to have any question they would like to ask of Mrs. Colnicle? No? Anyone have any points they wish to make?
Yeah, please, Chair. Appendix A, there's 33 names on there. Shouldn't there be 34? It looks like there's 33. Maybe I've miscounted. While we're puzzling over that, the other... can I just confirm for the records, it is just page 12 that is the entire list of all gifts recorded? Because it just seems to be offices, there's no councillors or anything on that. We can just verify for the
yes,
records.
that is, yes.
Thank you.
There are actually, you can have a council. There are only 33. But having said that, just having a quick look at it, I couldn't tell you for now exactly which one is missing.
It's the first one on the list. Councillor Beaumont.
Oh, right, thank you. Okay, anyone else wants to make any points on this particular report? Okay.
And, sorry, Chair, if I can deal with the points that were raised by Mrs. Kandaka. Clearly, the legislation changed in 2011. The obligation to maintain an up-to-date register actually went by the board. So that was a requirement in the Local Government Act 2000, and the Localism Act 2011 didn't place the same emphasis upon keeping a register up to date. What it does say, however, is that if a member becomes aware of a conflict of interest or a disclosable pecuniary interest, to use the terminology of the legislation, then they are required to declare it at that point and to then inform within 28 days the monitoring officer and update their register accordingly. So that's how the law now works. So the fact that a member's registration of interest is not exactly up to date may not be an issue unless and until something comes before a committee which requires a decision. To deal with the other point, however, where a member is dealing with an issue which is in breach of a disclosable pecuniary interest, in other words, they have an interest and fail to declare it, that's a matter for the police and should be reported to the police.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Anyone else have any comments they wish to make? So we do have a recommendation at number 2 on page 9. Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, moving to agenda item 7, which is the Local Government Ombudsman's Annual Report for the year ending 31st of March 2018. I have 2 speakers on this one. Mrs. Michelle Kandaka.
Well, do you want me to...
If you want to
just very briefly present the report, Chair. I've said to Chris Tydeman I'd take this report because I was here anyway. So this is the annual report that we get. All councils get an annual report from the Ombudsman. It sets out, in effect, 2 things. One, how the sector is performing generally, and secondly, how the council performs specifically against the benchmarks. You will have on page 18, there is the summary report which gives you an indication of the number of cases dealt with, and you'll see that there was one detailed investigation which was upheld. That was a matter that involved planning enforcement, where it was alleged that there was a failure on the part of the enforcement officer to disclose their identity and details at the start of a meeting with a householder. The outcome of that was that the Ombudsman upheld the complaint, but because it was a case where it was finely balanced as to the evidential background to it, it was agreed that the council would offer an apology, and the ombudsman accepted that that was a suitable way of resolving the matter, and indeed by the time the ombudsman was dealing with it, the apology had already been given, so the matter was then closed at that point.
Michelle?
But just a sort of little comment really, rather than, you know, any great diatribe. I was just sort of surprised at how many are actually referred back for local resolution, because my understanding was that in order to go through to the ombudsman, you had to have gone through all the layers of complaint and appeal and what have you with the council, and that implied that the person and the council haven't been able to come to any conclusion for the person to then want to take it to the ombudsman. So I'm just, you know, interested that they've just been sent, a lot of them are sent back for a local resolution, and how that actually works, because local resolution didn't work in the first instance. So that's really what I want to understand.
Well, I'll deal with that once we get to the
Okay,
item, Chairman.
can I, okay, thank you, Michelle. Councillor Condell.
Thank you. The local government ombudsman is a very difficult thing to use. You have to go through the council's full procedure, which can take many, many months, and quite often the council itself isn't that obvious when it actually accepts a complaint that it's going through the procedure. Things are particularly woolly sometimes in terms of, are you in the complaint procedure? Is it being taken as a formal complaint? And so it's understandable that a lot of people think they've exhausted the process and go to the ombudsman and then get batted back to the council. So the first thing I'd say is this is actually not a good sign that a lot of things are going to the ombudsman and getting batted back to the council. Secondly, there's no idea in this report of the 15 or 16 things that go back to the council. What was the outcome of them? Was it established that the council had done something wrong and an apology would be made? Because obviously, if the ombudsman is going to tell the council to make an apology, and you go through the procedure and then you go to the ombudsman, if the ombudsman says you haven't finished the procedure and then the council issues an apology, effectively the council has fessed up to doing something wrong, but it doesn't get recorded. There's an awful lot of complaints going through this system which seem to be back, and I'd like to know, of those 15 or 16, depending on how you read it, how many was found against the council. I'm also concerned about how many are in planning and development, because that is a big area, and it's very vague, this, in terms of whether it's about borough plan or whether it's about individual planning applications. So I understand why we cannot have a massive list of details on the complaints, but at least a category, so you'd actually know planning and development, planning application, or just one level of detail. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, well, I can
Does
answer
any
those
member
questions.
have any question they want to ask of Councillor Condell based on his comments? No? Okay, thank you. And any member wish to comment?
Please, Chair, thank you. A couple of things. I don't want this to be just a box ticking exercise, I'm sure none of us do. So to learn something from this, we need to have some context. And Director Richardson did say, yes, the Ombudsman does give you this is what the benchmark is, but I'm struggling to see that leap out at me here. I'm not sure how we put ours in context, where the data is for that, for our returns. The other thing is, yes, there are an awful lot of them that are referred back for local resolution. You know, to disagree slightly with the speaker, I think we would like to know a bit more information, even just a paragraph on each one. There's not that many, and in the whole year, if that's the sum of all the people that felt that they had reached the end of the process with the council and were at an impasse and still weren't getting satisfactory resolution, then I don't think having a page and a half of A4 or 2 pages of A4, just giving a paragraph for each one explaining exactly what that was, is too much to ask. I think that would be exactly the kind of thing that this committee would want to look at and draw some conclusions and trends, just to see if there are any systemic issues with the council as far as public perception is concerned.
Anyone else have any comments before I ask Mr. Richardson's comments? No?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Just want to pick up on, thank you, Chair, sorry. Just want to pick up on one thing that Councillor Truman's here mentioned. Unless you've been here for several years and seen a number of these, there's a certain context that's not included, because we don't know whether the trends here are up or down year on year. We've got some isolated data which tells us we had 16 referrals, 5 of which were planning and so on and so forth. But we have no indication here as to whether there's a trend that's going up or down based on previous years. And I think it would be interesting for us to be able to have that information, please.
Okay. Anyone else wish to comment?
Okay. I'm sure Phil wants to answer.
In terms of trend analysis, Chair, there is actually, as you'll see on page 18, there is, and you'll have to look at this yourself, but there is the hypertext link to the website for the Ombudsman, where they do actually produce all of the data. So, and it's all there, so you can actually filter it and look at it and compare it, etc. So all of that information is there, which is, I presume, why they provide that, so that you can do that. Dealing with Mrs. Kandaka's point, Chair, the position is, what tends to happen with complaints are that we go through our complaints procedure, and obviously, as you've said, the Ombudsman won't take a complaint until our complaints procedure has been exhausted, which means it's got to have got through the level 2 review process. That doesn't mean necessarily, however, that there isn't any substance to the complaint. It just means that the complaint has been analysed and assessed and then reviewed, and the view of officers who've done that is that there is nothing's gone wrong. What can happen is when the Ombudsman investigates, they then do a much wider, deeper investigation, and things can emerge where they will place quite a lot of weight on a particular issue rather than something else, and come to the conclusion that there may well be some fault, that not necessarily leading to maladministration, but something that they feel it hasn't worked as well as it should be, and they will say, we don't think it's something that necessitates a finding of fault, but we feel that it's appropriate in these circumstances for you to offer a local resolution. That may well be an apology, it may well be that something needs to happen, and what we would do prudently is then say, well, we'll take that on board and we'll do whatever you're recommending. And that's usually without any finding of fault, but it is simply a mechanism for filtering out and saying, we feel that something should happen here. In terms of the overall results, and picking up Councillor Kandaka's point, there is the table, which is on page 14, does give you a breakdown of those across our service areas, so you will see that there is a breakdown of planning and development there, so if you want to have a look at that. And if members do want to raise any questions in terms of any of the background to any of those, by all means please, and I can say this in all sincerity, please feel free to contact Chris Tideman, who is, I'm sure, more than happy to help you.
I think it would be difficult to itemise each individual complaint in relation to an individual person, because that would be not fair in a public document. So, bearing in mind the comments that Mr. Richardson has made.
Sorry, Chair. I do take your point entirely. I don't think we particularly want to put people's names and addresses and stuff down here. But I think for this to be of value to us, I think given there's a relatively small number of people on there, you know, just a couple of sentence summary of what each complaint was effectively about and what we were asked to really look at would be very useful. I think it would give councillors a really good feel for exactly what people out there are coming back to the council about. I'm very reassured by what Director Richardson said, that, you know, the council says, hey, you know, you're the Ombudsman, we take your advice and you act on that. But I think we'd like to know just a little bit more detail on each one of those cases.
If it's okay with you, Chair, I'll take that back to Chris Tideman and ask the question. I would imagine that it's possible to do, but...
Do you want me to propose that and somebody second it or whatever? Should we-
No, it doesn't need that. I can do that. We can bring it back if
Yeah,
if
okay.
it-
Well,
So will the
I think
minutes
that-
reflect that we've made that request?
I think that what we will do,
Won't be
we will ask for it, an update at the next meeting of your conversation with Christine to see
Yes.
what is possible.
and if we can provide you
Yeah.
with some context, then we will.
So the content, the recommendation would be that the content of the report be noted with a
Referral back.
further report at the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, agenda item 8. I think this is this yours, Craig?
It's-
This is mine.
That's yours, is it,
Yeah.
Linda? Okay.
Yeah, this is my half-yearly report that shows progress against the 2018-19 internal audit plan, and also a summary of the findings of the work we've completed so far. So Appendix A, which is on page 21, that is the internal audit plan that was approved by this committee in March of this year, and you'll see which audits have been completed. Where they've been completed, you'll find a summary of the findings, Appendix B, and I've also highlighted those that are in progress. What I have included in this report is a section on section 5 of the body of the report on page 19 around counter fraud activity. There has been a slight restructure, and the counter fraud officer now reports directly to me. So I thought it would be useful for you to see the activity. He's a very experienced investigator, has been very successful so far, and he's achieved savings to the public purse, that's not necessarily NBBC, public purse of over £42,000. So I thought that was useful information for you. And I think that's all I need to say at this point.
We have 2 speakers on item 8. Mrs. Condalco.
Thank you. I seem to think I spoke probably last year and things, and the comment is how little things have got significant assurance. There's hardly anything with any significant assurance. That does alarm me a little bit. I mean, satisfactory, that just the term satisfactory does not instill a great deal of confidence, although I know there's not many levels of assurance, but I would like to see rather more significant and less of the satisfactory and even less of the limited. On the limited assurance for mileage claims, I noticed one employee failed to record journeys on the claim form and was unable to provide any evidence to support the amount claimed. I trust that those sort of things, they just don't get paid, because, I mean, that is so basic. And it is concerned that there were a lot of things on the mileage claims that weren't, correct. So I'd be interested to know what actually has been done to sort that out, because you can't have someone having to go through every single thing and putting it in on Google and think, oh yes, that's the right amount of miles and what have you and things. So I'd be interested to know that. Only limited assurance on contaminated land. Last time I spoke, I think it was asbestos or something, and that was also very limited. And these are, potentially rather important health issues. So I think it's a concern that hasn't been resolved. And then moving on to mobile climbing towers, and that was a value for money review. And it says, following the financial analysis, the better option in terms of value for money was option 3, which in option 3 is sell the tower and buy in a complete service. Now, I don't understand why it's not just sell the tower. We've heard in the cabinet last week or the week before things, how tight things are, that we were introducing green bin charge, green waste disposal charge, because that wasn't a thing that the council had to provide. It was a discretionary thing. Something like the climbing tower has got to be even more discretionary. It's absolutely non-essential. Yes, it's a nice to have, but if we're going to spend money at all for health benefits, that is not the way to get great health benefits. I raised it at the cabinet as a way of saving money to, just sell it and get rid of it and things. And it was of great concern that neither the leader nor the director actually knew how much it was costing. Yeah. And I'm absolutely certain that, once again, without actually having gone through a FOI to find out the exact figures and things, that there'll be very, very few people who've used it for the amount that it's costing and things. So I think this audit committee really needs to look at that very, very seriously and make a recommendation.
Thank you, Mrs. Condarco. Councillor Condarco.
No one wants to raise any points for my wife first, then.
Well, I'm sure there are no points of clarification, so continue.
Thank you very much, Chair. Contaminated land. Where we should be building houses is on our contaminated sites. We should be decontaminating them and getting them back into use. That's what they're doing in the West Midlands, and that's far better than building sites miles out of town with lots of transport impacts. Absolutely appalling. We've got nowhere with contaminated land, and I think that should come to a committee to actually see what's going wrong with it. Either the internal scrutiny, I guess, but it needs to be a recommendation from the audit committee that we look at contaminated land. Big issue. Waste management. We have massive staffing issues. We are trying to run a service out of a tiny depot, and our waste is overspending by £500,000. A lot of it is down to staffing issues. I keep saying we need a shared service. This review doesn't say limited or satisfactory, but the whole issue of waste is killing this council. The amount that's going into it and the amount of agency staff we're piling in to try and keep the service going. We need to be working better, we need to be working more sensibly, and we need to have a plan for all the extra housing and the extra rounds, rather than these green waste charges, which seems to be just propping up and paying for the inefficiencies. My wife mentioned the climbing wall. Neither the leader nor the director could actually tell us if it was actually costing us any money. In the budget book, it costs us £76,000, and we're told they'd save £32,000 by going for this option 2 and franchising out. There is no data in here about the climbing wall, and when I emailed the director to ask how much is it costing, I haven't had an answer. We need to have figures, and we need to go through this climbing wall and kill it once and for all. And for the director and the cabinet members not to know how much the climbing wall is costing, it's unbelievable. They're supposed to be managing it, and we need, and I hope this committee will make a recommendation, that we release the internal audit report on the climbing wall and put it to bed once and for all. Thank you, Chair.
Is anything on points of clarification that Councillor Condarco's comments? No, obviously not. Thank you. Do you want to...
There's just a couple of things. The issue around the significant assurance on the audits that we've done. We do carry out follow-up reviews. We do issue revised assurance. And from the follow-up reviews that we have done, and certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, managers have reacted to the issues that we've raised, and we have been able to improve the assurance levels. So although we're not issuing a lot of significant first time around, it is reassuring that improvements are being made. And in relation to mileage, we are taking a report to management team, and we're drafting that at the moment, so that will go to management team next week to take action on mileage claims. And around contaminated land, the reason that we gave limited assurance was really because the strategy was out of date. It was drafted 8 years ago, and a lot of the issues can be addressed. They can link items within the strategy to the council's key aims and priorities and develop an action plan. So a lot of the issues can be addressed by updating that strategy.
Yes, please, Chair. If I may, can I just mention on the climbing tower, Chair, that the value for money study on the climbing tower was undertaken at my request, specifically to assess the options in terms of whether or not the option that we had adopted was the better option. The outcome from the audit, the management response, is that we will look at option 3 when the contract that is in place expires. So there is a contract in place. We will review the options in the light of the audit report when that contract comes to an end. So we will pick that up. And I will be responding to Councillor Condarco. The budget figure is £73,000. What I have been asking for is a clear indication of what the current year's spend is, because it's considerably less because of the new contract. So I have those figures now, providing that to Councillor Dartford in due course.
Right.
Sorry, Chair, can I just get Director Richardson to clarify? New contract, it's relatively new, but it's a fair way through, isn't it? Because it was for a year originally?
No, it's a 2-year, it's an initial 2-year term, the contract.
Right, so when's the 2 years up?
In about, well, it's over a year to go.
It's got just over a year to go, okay.
So, any member want to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On page 19 about the new counter fraud officer, I did read this, and obviously he's done quite a lot of good work for the council since June. So I'd like to make a recommendation to the committee that we have a vote of thanks for that officer. So I'd like to propose that.
Second.
Okay, second, okay. If I'll roll it up with the recommendation when we get there, if that's okay. Councillor Brown.
Chair, can I just clarify on point 5.2 then? Is the £42,000, is that in the calendar year or the financial year, please?
The financial year.
Thank you.
Chair, yeah, so looking at the report and the Appendix B specifically, A and B, I'll try and marry the two up. The flexi time one, which would be really interesting, that seems to be missing. I don't know what the outcome of that audit was, whether it was limited or satisfactory or...
Apologies for that.
If you can email
Yes,
after
yes, apologies.
members, I'd really like to see a copy of that report as well. That would be very handy. The other one is Affordable Housing Development Programme. Again, I assume the scope was very limited, given, as you've said in here on page 23, in the little paragraph about it, that it's I guess a lot of these issues will come out of the borough plan being adopted, but we still are giving thousands of houses planning permission, and a quarter of those are supposed to be affordable of one kind of another or another. So I would very much like a copy, and I'm sure other members will be interested too, of that report into the affordable housing, please.
I'm sure that isn't a problem. Yeah, you're okay with that?
Yeah.
Right, so any further comments? So moving back to the recommendation, the actual recommendation states that progress against the audit plan at Appendix A, key findings in Appendix B, and the work of the county fraud officer be noted. And I believe you wanted to include and thanks be given to the officers involved with the work that has been done.
Absolutely.
You have to.
Yeah, particularly the counter fraud officer.
Okay, thank you. You noted that one, yes, of course. Okay, thank you. If we could then move to agenda item 9. I think we're over to you, Graham, now.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if Javid had an opportunity to introduce himself at the beginning. I'm going to say what Javid acts on. There are signs over there, but we're over here. And Javid was the audit manager that stood in for Scarlett when she wasn't able to take over the audit last year. He didn't meet him at the July audit committee. And we weren't sure whether Javid decided to stay with the firm because of what he might be leaving. So Javid has decided to stay with the firm, and therefore he's going to continue as your audit manager. So I asked him to come along today, and unfortunately I got stuck in traffic, and he didn't. So he was here slightly before me, so I can't do introductions. But Javid is the audit manager for the audit for this year, and we'll take you through have detailed conversations with Craig and his team around the audit. So just introducing Javid. What you've got in front of you today is our annual audit letter. There's not a lot of new information in here, very little new information in here, because basically the way we do the audit letters, what we have done in recent times, is to summarise what was in the audit findings report that the committee heard in July. What we do try to do in a way is repackage it more for the public amongst those important items that the public need to be aware of in terms of the accounts. As it was some time ago, just a reminder in terms of where we were on our financial statements. We provided an unqualified opinion on the financial statements and an unqualified value for money conclusion. The slightly new element in here is around certification of grants, and it's just to do with the timing. The annual audit letter covers sort of all the work since the last audit letter, so we actually reported in here on 16-17 housing benefit claims. It's just really a timing issue, it's not related to that, it's just that that work gets completed after the final accounts. So in that sense, there's no issues particularly to bring to your attention in terms of grant claims. The housing subsidy claim for 16-17 did require an amendment which was reported to DWP, and there was a qualification letter. What I would say to members is, given the complexity of that claim, it is not unusual to have those matters, those qualification letters. So I'm not standing here or sitting here as an auditor saying there's a fundamental issue with the way the claim is put together. I think members would appreciate the number of transactions that go through that particular set of accounts, and the change of circumstances of tenants and people claiming benefit. It's not unusual to find errors, small errors, and we have to report the smallest errors because we're only tens of pence. We are required to make that reporting. So really that's the new piece of information in here. And I suppose just taking you through again in terms of what the risk in the audit. We found no issues with revenue recognition or management override controls. As I say, the one area we did look at again in more detail was around net pension liability. We took you through that in July in respect of the discussions and negotiations we were having with the pension fund around supporting employees of leisure trust. That's now been resolved. It's now been put back in your main accounts, which is where we were last year. So you decided not to adjust the accounts once you'd actually had that reevaluation because the sum was so small in relation to the overall accounts, but now they will be picked up as part of next year's revaluation. So in terms of other statutory powers, as members are aware, and it links into some of the previous articles, we are currently looking at 3 objectives on the accounts. 2 of those I'm almost ready to release the reports. I can't give the details of the audit committee in respect of I have to respect the objectives first, so they have to have a comment, sight of them before I can release any of those issues. One is in relation to the mobile climbing tower. One is in relation to the equestrian centre, and another one is in relation to the setting of car parking fees. On the first 2, one is with PSAA, because they, as in terms of their contract, have cited them before we release them, because basically they hold insurance in case I go to court. I'm awaiting feedback from them, and I think they've raised one issue around that. And on the second one, I'm in discussions with the council around if there are any documents I can release alongside my report, if they're not confidential under various sections of the Act. So I'm very close to releasing those 2, and then the third one on car parking, I'm hoping to get draft reviews out in the next week or so. So that will be concluded. Until those are concluded, the opening audit remains open. I need to go through the due process. So in terms of that's where we are in terms of 17-18 audits, and then I don't propose to go in detail around value for money conclusion. I have to take questions on that. And we also report in here the actual audit fees issued. In terms of the to be confirmed one, that is because we haven't completed the 17-18 housing benefit claim. In terms of a brief update on that, I can say audit work is complete and I should be signing that claim off hopefully at the end of this week. Again, it will be subject to a qualification letter, but there's no issues again within the items we've identified that say to me that there's a significant issue with the housing benefits system. Again, there are errors that we not so much expect, but where they are common errors that we identify at other clients and they can be reported going forward. So at that point, I will stop and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. But I have one speaker, which is Councillor Condotte.
Thank you. It's very important to learn lessons from the past, which is why audit reports are really useful for things that happened the year before, the year before that. Things like the pension fiasco over the Leisure Trust, where the liability, whose was it, what we were responsible for. And we had this at full council meetings, we were told things, don't worry, we're not responsible for. And it comes out, the auditors established we have responsibility, or there was responsibility agreed. So there's all sorts of things come out of this process. And I think we do need actually to have an A4 sheet on some of these things at the end of the audit process to say, this is what happened, this is how much money this fiasco cost, be it the riding school fiasco, the pension fiasco, or all the many other fiascos we seem to have got through over the last couple of years. And as part of the audit, actually getting a prize for some of these fiascos, so we can learn not to make the same mistakes again. There's a lot of sayings about fools is a person who does something and then does something again and expects a different result. And this is why learning lessons is really important. Not so much blaming people, but actually saying, we went and we were foolhardy enough to think these pensions wasn't an issue, and actually they came back and bit us. Clearly we're doing some major cuts and things in the future, and we'll have more issues along these. And we mentioned the parking there as certainly the auditors looking at, value for money. And we're doing exactly the same thing with green bins. So I think actually having a thing that says we set the parking charges with no consideration for the loss of income, as you put things up, obviously less people take a service. This is what happened with the parking. We hiked the parking charges, and actually we found we didn't actually gain the 200,000 because £200,000 less income happened. And we're making the same mistake with green waste. If we charge too much, what will happen is less people will take it.
I think we need to stick to the auditor's report.
My point is, Chair, in terms of the report, it should actually make some clear comments about what happened so we can learn lessons. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, any member have any comment that they might wish to make? I'll bring you back in a minute, Graham.
Okay.
Any member have any comment they wish to make? No? Okay, Grant, do you want to?
Yes, Chair. In response to the Speaker, I would agree that actually part of the role of audit is to identify where improvement can be made, and we will be looking to make such recommendations as appropriate following the investigations. And as I say, I can't share the total findings at this point in time because they need to be shared with the objectors first. But if there are improvements to be made, we will make those recommendations. In terms of putting information into the public domain, I have to consider the rule, the law as it stands, and I will take that into account about whether or not, in public interest, certain information will be put into the public domain. Clearly, there is already a requirement for the council to publish expenditure of £500, and you can obtain it through the website already. So there is there is an evidence around that. Picking up, I think, on in terms of some specific queries around whether we should put it in here. This is the audit letter. It summarises their work in the year. If we make those recommendations during the year, then they're reflected in the annual audit letter, and they will be picked up as part of our ongoing work. So I take on board the overall message in terms of that. I think overall, that in terms of disclosure, in terms of the account, in terms of money, they are your accounts and they are your responsibility. In terms of, I suppose, pension liability, and I think I can make a general comment rather than a specific comment, is we are talking to all of our clients around if you're entering into, and we would consider this complex, innovative transactions, or especially as we are seeing local government, and I'm sure members appreciate this, with the pressures of reducing income from, say, central government grants and things like that. You might be looking for more commercialisation, you might be looking for opportunities. We are having conversations with all of our clients around if you're doing those sorts of elements, and if you are someone that might involve outsourcing, it might involve putting your staff with other organisations, you need to be fully aware of the risks of that. What we are tending to see in the sector is if you are looking to outsource certain or contract out certain items, and leisure is a classic one, is that the people who might want to take the work on want certainty in their pension costs. So there is a discussion going on around who picks up that pension liability. The item I would say as your auditor is being quite clear of the risks that you're entering into as you're going into. It's not saying you shouldn't do it, but it is being fully aware of those risks. So those are general conversations we're having. That area is a complex set of accounting as well. So we would expect you as a council, when you're making those decisions in the future, yes, to get appropriate advice if you can't deal with it in-house, and be fully aware of what the risks and rewards are of that, and factor those in. So that's in order to inform decision making, I suppose, as far as value for money. So that's a general comment I've made.
Okay, I want to thank Grant and Javed for coming along this afternoon. I know that we see them regularly when at these committee meetings. I'm sure we'll be seeing even more like Javed. And could I ask that the committee note the external auditor's report?
Chair, just before we do that, just to be clear, you're going to come back when you completed these, and we understand why you could certify, because
Yes,
you had those three responses. But you're saying part of it is that audits are there to point out where lessons should be learned, conclusions are going to be drawn. I appreciate you said some of that can't go in the public domain, but clearly the audit and standards committee here will get to see those comments that you make eventually.
Yes, I'll be honest, it's a grey area from the legal side, I'll be honest about that. What I would bring here is if there's any recommendations for improvement, I think that can go in public domain. I think if I make recommendations to the council, I'm happy to put those in the public domain. The actual objections themselves, I think what we've done in the past is they are normally held in, if need be, in the private session of the Audit and Standards Committee, because they are complex.
I don't think.
But it is a grey area about whether I can release them or not.
It's not so much that I'm asking about. I frankly, the minutiae of what the objections were, I'm not really that bothered about.
No.
What I'm more interested is if there were things to learn, and you've got recommendations that we will get to see.
Yes,
those.
and I would imagine on the first two, if they're complete within, hopefully in the time to go, like I've said, that when the next audit committee comes, as part of our update report, I will just include a page on that. It's got recommendations for improvement.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So again, thanking Grant and Javed, again, we have to note the report. Okay, thank you. Thank you both for your attendance. You're most welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting.
I need to stay for the next one, so that's the...
I think you may prefer to get back out into the traffic.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay, moving then. Yes, and the report was noted. So agenda item 10, which is the Treasury Management Monitoring Q2. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the second report for this financial year to this committee. As usual, try to adopt the same format, so at least you're not being bombarded with different information each time. The only points I will bring out is on the economic summary. Obviously, the Monetary Policy Committee changed the interest rates, so they voted unanimously to increase it to 0.75, so that has fed through the investment markets, which does feed through to our summary portfolio on 5.4 on page 39. So you'll see from there that our current investments, and we have got £48 million invested, is attracting 1% on average return, compared to 0.74 at the end of last financial year. Now, £48 million does seem quite high, but it's not in the context of things. This time of the year, we would expect investment balances to be high due to the cash flow. We get a lot of money in at the start of the year and spend it as the year progresses. So it won't be maintained at that level. It will drop off as the financial year continues. It's good to know that we are achieving some decent returns now, or better than we have done previously, and we are continually looking to see where we can actually place our investment by maintaining a decent spread of the portfolio, but taking advantage of 6-month or 1-year deposits where the rates are attractive, maintaining cash flow. Moving on to page 41, there is a point I will bring to your attention anyway. It's right at the bottom of paragraph 5.16. We're still awaiting the final details, but the government did announce that they would be removing the debt cap on the HRA, which will leave councils theoretically free to borrow as much as they see fit, as long as it is affordable for their HRA business plans. So as part of the HRA modelling that we'll be doing as part of the budget setting process, we will be looking at our debt portfolio and opportunities this council will have. But I thought it's worth bringing to your attention that the debt cap has been lifted now. Over the page on 5.17, that's our average performance for the year. Investments of 43 million on average has achieved 0.85. And what's pleasing is that I benchmark against a 6-month LIBID. What LIBID is, it's the London interbank rate. So between the banks themselves, if they were investing 6 months, they would get 0.71. We are achieving in excess of that. So that is good news. There's been very little activity on the debt, so there's nothing to report on that one. And the property fund, which goes into some detail over the page on page 43, it's still achieving excessive, really good returns. Even though they dip slightly, there is still no concern. The yield is still 4%. We're still achieving capital growth, although that did only marginal capital growth in the quarter to the end of September. But we've got £2 million invested in there, which is a very long-term investment, so that does help with our returns. The other good point to note is a few pages on page 47, and that's the revenue position at the top of that particular page. Because of the level of balances that we're holding, which primarily for the HRA, we're holding quite a few more reserves because of the timing of their capital investments, and also because of the upturn in investment rates, we're looking to achieve quite a surplus on investment income compared to our original budget. And like I say, some of that is because of the timing of the interest rate increase. Section 6 of Prudential and Treasury indicators, there is nothing adverse to report there. And the appendices just give you some additional information so you can see how on each quarter our portfolio spread has been managed. But if anybody's got any questions, I'm quite happy to take them.
Great, usual. Good job done there. Well done again. I always ask the same question about risk appetite. Has that changed markedly since your last report?
The only change in risk appetite, we are not looking to go outside of the UK for investment still, so that's still in-house as such. What we are looking to do is, now the markets have settled down slightly and interest rates are changing, we're looking at stretching the portfolio, taking advantage of some 6 months and some 1 year. A lot of our investments were kept either liquid or very short dated because we were waiting for interest rates to start seeing them. So we didn't want to lock in while they were at the lower side.
So the counterparty risk is no.
There's no change in counterparty risk. All of our counterparties are still of high quality.
Just as a follow-up to that then, how are you viewing lending to other local authorities now? Obviously one local authority's had difficulties, albeit they've not. But I don't think they would have been allowed to renege on their debt to other authorities. Is that the view you're taking, and that other local authorities are still suitable counterparties?
Not all local authorities will be considered a suitable counterparty because they're a local authority. We do some due diligence. If we do, we've got one investment at the moment with another local authority. We do get some requests, and what we will do, we will look at their accounts, look at audited reports, look at how their accounts are structured, and then we will take a view ourselves internally whether it's considered to be a risk or not. So just because they're a local authority doesn't mean that they are an investment counterparty we would use.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions that they want to ask?
I mean, no questions here. I noticed you've got the MHCLG document back on the statutory override. I mean, the reason that's in there is because of your property fund. Yes, in reality, under the new accounting standards that come in, it's potential that, if you notice here, the capital lot is gone down about £20,000 in the quarter. Without those ones, you'd have had to have recognised that through the general fund effectively. So that the MHLD is proposing a statutory override to that, so that a 5-year override effectively, so that you don't have to, in a way that spreads out the volatility of council taxpayers, and you will recognise it when you end up either selling the investment or whatever. So it's trying to bring back in the way you've accounted for it over the past. It's been out for consultation. I think it's just when you see the accounts next year, there'll potentially be another reversal in there, just to identify that. And it also covers money market funds as well, accounts like that. So in a way, it's just trying to be in line with central government policy around where it wants some people to invest in property or even generally. So it's consistent with that, and not trying to make sure that local authorities aren't discouraged from doing that in a way that they would, and the government's central policy is. Probably something I want to keep an eye on now is in terms of the market loan you've got, in terms of complexities. If you are, I've noticed in here, turning over the borrowing on the HRA, we will be looking more I suppose around derecognition events. There are some very technical accounting stuff that I don't think will impact you directly, but just to say that we will be keeping an eye on that for when they get what's coming through. So we're all consistent. And Craig, I suppose, I don't know when you'll be bringing the capital strategy. I don't know exactly.
The capital strategy, which is going to be a new requirement, will go to the Cabinet, and that will go as part of the February report.
So that's probably one thing as members I'd keep your eye out for, because it links into Treasury management. It's a new report that you've got to produce. You've always had to do in line with the Prudential Code, so it's just something to keep an eye on, because that looks at the whole affordability of what you're going to do as a council in terms of investment. So I would say if we do a report to look out for in the new year, if it doesn't come through this committee.
Thank you, Graham. Any other member wish to comment? No, we have a recommendation that the committee notes the report. Is that accepted? Thank you very much. And that is the end of the agenda. Could I again thank officers for coming along and